other people who haven't been able to jump in can watch later on. And if you have any questions or anything, I think, oh, hi Bess, you just popped in. Probably the best thing is to type in the chat if you have any questions as I go along. And the whole idea behind this is that we can do sort of the theoretical side of Surefoot through Zoom meetings, and then the practicals when we get together in Santa Fe. So I am going to see if I can get this. I have two screens, which is handy. And I'm going to share screen. So, oh, wait a second. I think I got the wrong screens. We'll switch that and put that over there. And put that over there. Play. Oh, I don't know why. Are you guys seeing the screen with the two images or the screen with the one image? You should see the screen with the one image, but I am not sure. Brad, do you know how to make that work? When I showed the screen, it put, it's doing it that way.
Okay, what are you looking for?
I wanted this on this screen because this is the screen that's sharing. Unless I simply, turn off that screen.
Well, I think go up to your Apple preferences. Yeah. Go to screens,
Displays.
And go to arrangement.
I can just turn off the others.
Yeah, we can just turn the other one off and just see if that works.
Okay. So let's give that a shot. Go ahead. So now let's see if I hit play on this. No, it's not going to do it. Okay, so you guys get to see two slides at once because I can't figure out how to get, unless I unplug that screen.
What are they seeing anyway?
Bess, do you know, are you seeing when I put it up, are you seeing the image with the two slides or the image with the one slide?
I only see you. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay.
Oh,
so,
I don't know. How did we fix that? I only see you.
Okay, so when I do screen sharing, which should be share screen.
Great, yeah.
Okay, this is where, there you go. I had this working when I had Robin on. Share screen.
So, video, does that have to?
That's where I'm at.
Okay.
Oh, wait, maybe down here, shared? Let's try that button. Oh, yeah.
Okay, try that.
Share.
Oh, something's starting. Yeah.
Okay, so do you see two images or one image? Do you see a left and a right or just one?
Just one, and then you're in the lower right corner.
Oh, cool. Okay. Awesome. All right. So this slideshow is going to take us through some of the science behind the reason horses can feel in their feet. And while we don't have any evidence yet, I have researchers that are working on coming up with evidence for Surefoot. I think in the end, we know it all works, so we don't need that evidence, but it'd be really nice just for the scientific world to accept what we're doing. Then Bob Bowker is the person that I have spent a lot of time talking to. And, you know, he talks about how the foot is a sensory organ. So we tend to think of the foot as like our foot in a shoe. It's encapsulated, it's down there, we kind of ignore it. We don't really kind of think a lot about the feedback system that is happening between the interface between the foot and the ground and our brain. So what this series of slides that I'm going to talk about is from Bob Bowker's research about the foot being a neurosensory organ. I actually know Dr. Bowker and Diane Isbell, who I just saw out in Sacramento in January, and she's actually going to be doing some research on Surefoot. She has a couple of different ways to measure muscle tension and that sort of thing. So it'll be interesting to see what she comes up with. Bob's now retired, and he's actually doing a course in April, and I'm going to be taking that course with him to learn more about the foot. But the bottom line is that there are lots of nerves that are down going from the foot to the brain. And these nerves are giving the horse a lot of feedback about where his foot is, how it's meeting the ground, different pressures. So it's this very rich supply of nerves that are holding everything together. And that is most likely what we're affecting when we're putting horses on Surefoot pads. There's a lot of different types of sensors in the foot. These are the mechanoreceptors. What you want to know here is that there's a bunch of different types of sensors on the foot. There's a couple we're going to talk about specifically, but just so you know, we have the free nerves, and they're sensitive to touch and pressure. Merkel discs, light pressure sensitive. I don't know how to say, I think it's Meissner's corpuscles, okay, also pressure and touch. The Pacinian corpuscles and the Raffinis are the ones we're going to really look at a little bit more. And then the root hair plexus. So that's the hair follicle around the cornet band. So this is an impression pad that a horse stood on. Impression we're now calling a hard pad to make it easier for people to know where that fits in the lineup of the different densities. But as you can see here in this picture, we have really clear impression of the two front feet. And what I want to point out in this picture is that we have frog impression. So you can actually see that this horse, his frog, is making contact with the pad. And there are a lot of times when I'll have a horse stand on the hard pad, and when it comes off of it, we don't see any frog impression. That makes me wonder what kind of sensory input that horse is getting into his brain when we're not seeing a frog impression. Because as I show you the next series of slides from Bob, that area at the back of the foot is extremely important in terms of sending information to the brain. So one of the things that I need to impress on everyone that's going to be doing Surefoot is that unless you are trained as a farrier, we can't make any kind of diagnosis or anything like that. So the best I can say is, wow, I see a frog impression on this horse, or I don't. And I leave it up to the owner to make the conclusions as to what they should do about that. Because in so many cases, you're going to be working with horses and looking at their feet and seeing horses' feet that are really imbalanced, or that, you know, you'd really like to change. But as a Surefoot practitioner, we don't have that training. And very often we don't know the circumstances in which people are, you know, what they have available as a farrier to make any kind of changes. So when people ask me about that, I often say, well, why don't you just show the farrier what you're seeing and ask his opinion, so that we're not trying to tell the farriers what to do. Some Surefoot people are farriers, and that's a whole different story. You have the expertise and the credibility. But in general, it's just a really good idea to say what you observe without making any kind of speculation or suggestion as to what to do different, but this is what I see. So the key receptors that we're looking at in the foot are the Pacinian corpuscles, and there are light pressure, vibration sensations at the heel bulbs, and more deeply within the foot, they sense pain. The Raffini-like endings are slow adapting stretch receptors responding to pressure. They are around the major nerves passing to the foot and within dermal areas of the sole and heel region. So these two are very important in terms of how I think that it's one of the ways that Surefoot is influencing horses. And there's many ways to look at Surefoot and the effects it's having, but these two certainly seem to play a role. So these two receptors are activated during movement when the foot is contacting the ground surface, or when high energy vibrations are transmitted through the ground when the foot is stationary. This latter one, the high energy vibrations, I've had people in the past wonder if there isn't some sort of an effect where we're actually, how do I put this? We're disconnecting the horse from the ground in a way. And if those sensors are picking up high energy vibrations, and there are high energy vibrations that are occurring that we may not feel, this could be a way in which Surefoot's having a big effect on the horses. So again, this is all from Bowker's chapter, and this is a drawing that I took from that, and you can see where the Pacinian corpuscles are located in the heel bulbs, and the Ruffini-like endings are in the sole of the foot. So the sensory structures in the foot are activated by physical deformation of the nerve endings and don't necessarily require conscious perception to respond immediately to stimuli. So what's that saying is you don't have to be conscious of the effect, that the effect is happening because of the change in shape, the deformation of the nerve endings. So we know when we put a horse's foot on a Surefoot pad that we're changing the surface and therefore typically giving them something softer and cushier. Are we decreasing the deformation in the nerves? This is really hard to say, but it's something to think about, that somehow, because horses, and this is where I keep going back, I've looked at horses on all different kinds of surfaces, soft surfaces, hard surfaces, and yet you put them on a Surefoot pad and there's a change. And so if it was simply a softer surface, like a sand surface versus a concrete surface, one would think that you'd see changes, or not, you wouldn't see the kind of changes we see when we put them on a pad. But when you put that horse on a Surefoot pad, there is a very definite change, whether it's a horse living in Holland, a horse that's on concrete, a horse that's on good footing. And that's one of the things I find so fascinating, is that people have spent thousands and thousands of dollars on good footing. You stick them on a Surefoot pad and you see a change. So how the horse perceives his environment is that those sensory structures in the foot are activated by physical deformation of the nerve endings and don't require that conscious stimuli. We do see a conscious change in the horses, so that leads to the question, are we working through multiple pathways? And I don't have Stephen Peters' information in this slideshow. Dr. Stephen Peters is a neuropsychologist. He works with humans, but he's written a book called Evidence-Based Horsemanship. And I'll try and have a reading list of different books that I think, hello, I just blanked out my screen. Come on. Oh, come on, there we go. Sorry, I blanked out my screen. But evidence-based. And so, if you're interested in learning more about the horse's brain, there are resources. But the bottom line is that clearly we're affecting these horses, and maybe at first it's just this deformation of the nerves that's not conscious, but there is clearly a conscious piece that occurs because the horses start running back to the pads. So this is a cross-section of a foot, and the blue lines are back where the Pacinian receptors would be. The red is where the Ruffinis are. The yellow is the deep digital flexor tendon and the extensor tendon coming in, and I've forgotten what the little green line is. But basically what we're looking at here is that there are these mechanisms in the foot that we are affecting in one way or another with Surefoot. So in summary, those Pacinian corpuscles are appropriately activated when the horse lands normally with a heel first impact. So now we're back to the idea that a poorly shod horse that's landing toe first isn't going to get the kind of information into those receptors the way a horse that's landing flat or heel first is going to. Again, we're not there to judge the quality of the farrier work, but there's certainly going to be a difference between a well-shod horse and a poorly shod horse. And in some instances, the surefoot's not going to work if the horse is so badly shod. You might give the horse temporary relief from discomfort, but any kind of lasting change isn't going to happen until you address those feet. So that's where a conversation with the owner gently is required, because they might not have another option for a farrier. And this is one of the things we've been going to the Hoof Summit. Brad just came back from Cincinnati, and we've been going to that meeting 3 years now to just make ourselves known to farriers. We had surefoot pads at the World Equestrian Games down in North Carolina. I sent down 6 half pads and a full set of pads. They were supposed to go to the Hoof Summit to be auctioned off, and not one single pad appeared. So those pads have gone into the the universe and are doing good work. But there was the lead farrier at WEG, James Gilchrist, had a Swedish horse coming to him, and just from what they had radioed to him, he knew that he had a serious problem on his hands. He didn't even take the half physio pads out of the package. He just put the horse on them in the package. I have a photograph of the label and everything. And he said it bought him enough time to be able to get that horse where he could do something for him. So it really made a difference to that horse. And James is a big fan of Surefoot now and carries his pads around wherever he goes. So this is where we're working on multiple fronts to try and educate farriers about how Surefoot can be useful to them, how their clients can use Surefoot to aid in continuing progress for the horse as he's being worked with to make improvements in his foot quality, and also just with the owners to help sort of educate them. So Surefoot isn't going to it's not going to cause a problem, but what it does is it often magnifies what someone's looking at so that they can see it more easily. So I think of Surefoot as kind of like this magnifying glass. When you put the foot on the pad, you can see the shape of the foot, you can see where the pressures are, how the pad gives to that foot, and that gives you a lot of clues about how that horse is habitually standing and or how that horse is shod. And with that information, that's where the owner in the conversation with their farrier can make improvements to the overall quality. So Surefoot actually has a lot of different roles in the world, I think, in terms of veterinary care, education, and horse comfort. So the other piece about the Pacinian receptors that I want to point out is they're probably activated by low frequency vibrations arising from deep underground. So horses can feel vibrations that we don't necessarily feel. And the best example of that I had was when my horse Andy, my little quarter horse, one day he was absolutely hysterical and I couldn't figure out why. And there was nothing I could do to console him. And this is before I had Surefoot. But it turned out there had been an earthquake in Richmond, which was about 3 to 4 hours away. So he was picking up the vibrations of that earthquake, and he was extremely upset. And once that was over, he was fine again. So these low frequency vibrations arising from deep underground, again, I go back to the question is Surefoot in some way dampening those vibrations, or somehow it's like putting the mute button on, and so that the horse is not feeling those vibrations, and that brings about a response in the nervous system. Okay, so tactile and light pressure sensations are known to be important in the activation of normal gait reflexes and posture, and there's various ways to utilize these sensory inputs as therapies. So this again is Bob Bowker's work in that chapter that I referenced in the beginning, and this is what they're saying, that there's various ways to use these sensory inputs as therapies. And what they've found is that there's using, if they stimulate the frog, the back of the foot with pads, they can see a change. So when we put the horse on surefoot pads and we start to see that frog impression, then are we stimulating the back of the foot? And again, I go back to when you have a horse on the pads and you don't see a frog impression, that always leads me to the question of what kind of input is that horse getting or not getting in terms of where he is in space, how his foot meets the ground, how he orients himself. Because no matter the size of the horse, all he gets are those 4 little feet to stand on. And if he's not getting good information from the foot through the nervous system to the brain, then that is going to compromise him in terms of his movement and his organization and his ability to deal with his environment. So they're talking about paying attention to the sensory systems and the neural circuits and locomotion may offer new diagnostic and therapeutic opportunities. And so it's in refractory gaits, meaning abnormalities. And so what they're talking about here that can't be blocked out, in the veterinary world, they'll block a horse to see if that changes the lameness pattern. It doesn't always change the lameness pattern. So is there something about the receptors aren't getting the right input, or there's something disconnecting? And how can they treat these types of lamenesses that are not responding to medication, trimming, and shoeing? So again, this is where they're looking at this from a very scientific perspective. And I think when we look at it from the surefoot perspective, we keep seeing horses that have some sort of asymmetry in the gait or even lameness, and you put them on pads and they change. So is that we're affecting these sensors and inputting new information up into the brain, which is resetting them? Is it that we're addressing habits and how is a habit functioning from the foot to the brain in the horse? And again, other mechanisms like the parasympathetic nervous system, which we clearly see we're affecting the surefoot pads. So this is like, I'm just trying to bring you up to speed that if we really recognize that the foot is a sensory organ, then it makes sense that when we input information into that sensory organ through the use of the different surefoot pads, we're influencing the response. We may be resetting those receptors. Proprioceptors are another type of receptor that is in largely in joints, and they can get set to a certain set point. Sort of like a thermostat. You set the thermostat to 68 degrees, and it's going to hold at 68 degrees unless somebody comes in and changes the thermostat. And so that's another possible mechanism by which surefoot is acting, is affecting proprioceptors and resetting them. Very much like when I do the board under the foot for people, they have a certain amount of pressure that they exert against the stirrup with their foot, and that is a set point. And until I come in and show them that they don't need to have that much pressure, they don't even realize they're doing it. So, you know, this is where I'm really hoping that we can get more research done. I have a woman at Charles Strutt University in Australia, and they are starting to look at surefoot. I've got a grad student at Otterbein University who's going to be looking at surefoot as part of her study. And I have some people in the UK who are also wanting to look at proprioception and surefoot and different ways to change proprioception. So in the meantime, while we're waiting for this research to have results, what we know is that surefoot brings about relaxation in the horses. And sort of the questions in the back of my brain are, is surefoot dampening those high energy vibrations from the ground, which is why we see the level of relaxation, and surefoot being a form of therapy or education for the horse for those types of lamenesses that can't be blocked out. If any of you have been working with surefoot, I'm sure that you've seen these kinds of changes. And well, again, we don't have scientific evidence behind it. There's enough horse evidence that we're making significant changes in their nervous system to bring about relaxation, confidence, improved gait. And hopefully one of these days we'll have some data behind it. So, you know, it's the horses that tell us that surefoot's really working. And it's always important to recognize that they're the ones who we use as our guide and our feedback to the process. And the process is very much listening to each individual horse and facilitating their process and finding out what it is that they like and they want, and really listening to them. So, you know, the interesting thing about Surefoot is you can see immediate changes, short-term changes, mid-range changes, and then long-term changes. There's a great book by Norman Joge that's The Brain's Way of Healing. And in that he talks about a device that they've developed that they put on the tongue and put in electrical input and have these people do certain activities, and they can see immediate changes. Like there was a guy, I think he had either MS or Parkinson's, I can't remember which, and he couldn't sing anymore, and that was his profession. And he went into this university setting and came out singing again. So in the end of that chapter, I think they talk about something that I think is really important for us to keep in mind when working with horses, in that you can see immediate changes, like this horse here. We did this one session. She had Lyme disease. We did one 40-minute session. She totally changed the next day. It didn't look like the same horse, and it stuck. And we only ever did one session. And then you'll see horses that they, you know, maybe 2 or 3 times, or over the course of a clinic, or over the course of a week, you'll see the changes in the horse, and it lasts. And then your mid-range is about 6 months, and your long-term is 2 years. And that's what they're talking about in the book, these different stages. And as long as there aren't any setbacks, then like very serious things, it can take up to 2 years to make that the new pattern in the brain that really holds. So in that regard, I've seen many, many horses where, you know, 1 or 2 sessions and you'll see major changes, horses that need to see the pads on a more regular basis. And then I have one very specific case in mind. It was a little Pasofino who had been injured as a foal, probably broke his ribs, sent to a bad trainer, terrified him, and then started working with him. And the owner finally figured out that she had to use the pads every single day. And it's been like 2 years. And now we're starting to see these permanent lasting changes where he can go down the trail and be quiet and calm, whereas no one would ride with her before that. So I think we can use the model of human change in habits for horses, since the brains in that regard are quite similar in terms of the different parts of the brain that they have and how we hold memories, and also patterns stored in the cerebellum. Oops. Come on, next slide. Uh-oh. All right, so I'm being told the meeting has limited minutes, so maybe it's only a 30-minute. I think I have to stop this. Hang on.
Hey, Wendy, I just got a notice though that excuse me, that the meeting's been extended, so I'm not sure.
Oh, cool.
But so I'm not sure what that noise is.
That was me trying to figure out how to solve this. Let me see if I can get back to the PowerPoint. Because it wouldn't let me advance the slide.
Yeah, sometimes it goes weird when you share, like there's screen shares and you get to a certain point. Sometimes it just does weird stuff. I can't explain it.
Okay, no problem. But it seems like it won't let me get to the next slide, which it's no big deal because there was only like 2 more slides to go. Just basically talking about the results that we see. I had a couple little videos. I can post those up on the Facebook page. And they'll be in the slideshow, which I can probably post where you guys can access it. So, you know, that's the thing I want to press on people is it's clear that we're affecting the horse through the hoof, and it's clear that the hoof is a sensory organ. And when I went to Germany and I told people this, they were shocked. It was so fascinating because they hadn't considered that the foot was a sensory organ. In fact, my person over in Germany now has to go and do lectures about that. But I mean, it's obvious when you think about it, and that's where Bob's work is great because it gives us the science behind it and the evidence of the different types of neurons and things that we may be affecting. So that's kind of the, I don't know if I can get back to, well, you've all seen horses on pads. So, you know, basically with Surefoot, what we're doing is offering the horses these opportunities, and as practitioners, sort of showing the owners how they can use the pads, how they can make these changes with their horses. And I think one of the things that's really important is to keep them very present in what they're observing. So many people want to make, oh, he does that, so therefore blah, blah, blah. And really, like, let's just look at what's happening right in this moment. If that horse is standing on a pad and you see that how he's loading or that he's starting to sway, that's what you see. I think that's true for people in general, is to really stay present. So why don't I stop here, and just, if you guys have any questions for me, or later I'm gonna talk about the different levels in Surefoot. I have a chart that I can give people, but I think that our better use of time right now is just if you have any questions about Surefoot or what we're going to be doing in Santa Fe. No? Okay, because basically what we're going to do is work with the horses. I'm going to show you the most important thing is safe practices. The simple way to do that is to keep one hand on your back. Then you only have one hand to work with. That's the thing I'm going to emphasize the most when I see people working with the horses, and basically to really allow the horse to dictate. The other big thing that's so hard for people is to not correct the horse. So many people want to tell it, you know, stand or pick up your foot. Oh, come on, you can do it. And it's like, it's not about pleasing the person. And it's really hard for people to let go of that sort of performance anxiety that they want the horse to be good, or they want to be good and perform well, as opposed to this is a process, and if the horse is not picking up the foot, maybe we should look at a different foot. Maybe that's not, you know, what we should honor that and say, okay, what is it that's really going on? Or if I go to another foot, this one's light, that one's heavy. If a horse has ever had his feet picked up to have them cleaned out, he knows what you're doing when you go to pick up a foot. So typically, we have to start thinking about what is it that he is trying to tell us, and whether that's that he doesn't want to pick it up or he does. I'm going to put up on the Facebook page a bunch of links to different short videos that you can watch, and also there's a webinar where I had a really stressed young horse who was huge. Just before we started the webinar, we had a lightning strike about 10 feet from the barn, hit a telephone pole. And the horse like completely flipped out. But it was perfect, because so often it looks too easy and it's very deceptive. And there's some horses that are, you know, either super anxious or don't show it at first. And this horse is a great piece of film because he was really distressed. And rightly so. We had the thunderstorm through the entire webinar, and all the power was knocked out below the barn. So we were lucky enough to get the webinar done. But I'm always trying to get a little bit of footage of difficult horses, and typically I don't have a camera running when that happens. All right.
Yeah, Wendy, I've had only one horse that I had to, and he's still not really okay with them, but he's so difficult in so many ways. He's so afraid of things around his feet. And I actually had to use the clicker to get him to even consider putting his foot on one, because he would, and I had him completely free, because otherwise, when he freaked out, he would just take off.
Yeah.
And I've never had another horse like that. And I've done quite a few horses.
Yeah, so, no, you have. And that's the thing is, you know, it's that N of one or two. Like I had two horses. I had one horse literally touch the pad and explode. And later I showed video of him to Joyce Harmon, and she said, oh, he's clearly neurologic. And the owner never acknowledged that. And I had another horse in Colorado that had been on pads, like I'd gone there like every 6 months for like 3 times, and he was totally fine. And then one day he bronked off of them, like straight up in the air. And then I've had another horse where I didn't even get, 20 feet from him and he was running backwards. But that horse later was standing on all 4 pads without a halter on, sleeping, like 6 months later. So it's the thing is that first time you approach a horse with a pad is the most critical moment and the moment to pay the most attention to. Because you really don't know. You can guess, but you really don't know how they're going to react until you put that foot down. And I've had so many people tell me, oh, my horse won't stand on these pads. In fact, I was in Holland a couple of weeks ago. A woman had 2 horses. One had been in front of 6,000 people doing a demo and had been totally fine. And I went to put it on a pad and it absolutely was panicked. And then she told me that morning it slipped on ice. And her other horse that she thought would be totally afraid of the pads, stepped on the pads, glued himself to my shoulder and wouldn't leave me and just loved them. So, you just don't know. And that's the key, is to really be conscious of that first moment. And then it's, it gets pretty clear.
Yeah, I mean, this horse is difficult in so many ways. He's such a tense, nervous horse. And most of it, part of it is genetics and part of it is how he was started that wasn't appropriate for him and people didn't read him. And I think he'll be okay. It's just going to take a while.
Right.
It's just a slow approach for him. So anyway.
Yeah. And time frame, people go, well, how often should I do this? There's 2 questions that are the hardest questions to answer. And I've been doing this for almost 7 years and I still have a hard time. What pad should I start with? And how often should I do this? And I typically will tell people start with firm, just because that's sort of a middle of the, it's going to have some give, but it's not going to have too much give. Although the hard pads, it's so funny. Some days I use them a lot and then I kind of forget about them and then I start using them again. But the other question is how often and for how long, and that's so dictated by the horse. And I can't tell you how many people are like, people that are professionals, like, oh, I was afraid I would mess it up, is what their comment is to me. And it's so fascinating how people who have, lots of horse experience.
Lifestyle change forever.
Just mute her. You can do that.
Okay. Mute. There we go. So, it really is, not something that you can't prescribe. You can't say, do this for this long. And, I've had marketing people tell me that's how I should handle it. And I can't, because it's not listening to the horse. Yeah, Robin's laughing. You can see it because you know what I'm talking about, And so I think in a way it's actually really good because it helps break people out of that sort of routine of wanting a prescription or a set pattern, and really gets them to look at their horse and listen to their horse and interact with their horse in a way that, they tell you immediately when they're done. They tell you, but it helps them become better observers. And I think that's one of the keys with Surefoot is that observation piece. In fact, when I made the first DVD, that was the biggest question, is how am I going to get people to see what I see? And so I really had to back up and point things out. And that's what I try to do in my teaching, is when I have a horse on pads, point out the facial expression changes, the lowering of the head and neck, the swaying, if there is any, the difference in the chest muscles when you pick up one foot on a pad versus the other foot, and getting them sort of involved in the observations really helps them start to recognize what's going on and how it fits in their known world in terms of what they've experienced when they ride. We're going to have the horses. I sent a list out to the place. Haven't heard back from them yet, but I really love to do this mounted because A, the rider feels all these subtle little changes that we might not see. B, they can move the horse in between, which I think is really important. And C, you'll see the rider's movement, it sort of gets bigger because they're up high on the horse. And so if you have like a line behind them, you'll see how they're moving in relation to that line behind them. So, yeah. All right, has anybody, it's been about 45 minutes. Has anybody got any questions Like I said, I'm going to post short videos for you to watch, and I'll see if I can pull out that segment of that anxious horse. If you have any questions, you can email me, message me. I've sent invites to everybody to join the Facebook group just so I can kind of disseminate information. Also, it's not necessarily people who are practitioners, but people who are interested in becoming practitioners. And I'm using that to help try to set up other locations. So we're doing the one in Santa Fe, but I'm working on having one in Georgia and maybe one in the Chicago area. So, you know, if you join that group and you can't get to this meeting or you want to get to another one, you can see there where I'm scheduling things.
Thanks, Wendy. That was helpful.
Okay. All right. So successfully completed my first Zoom meeting. Thanks, Robin. And I'll try and do another one before we get to Santa Fe, but I'll be down in Costa Rica I leave on Saturday. So if I should have enough internet connection there. And if not, I'll just try and do that by putting up posts and things like that. Okay.
Yeah, just so you know, Wendy, after you're finished is when it'll download the recording, and
Okay.
then it'll turn it into an MP4. Just
Perfect.
so, yeah, and you can find it on your Zoom document folder.
Great. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in, and see you next time.
Thanks, Wendy.
Bye, Bess.
Bye.